Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to recommend a ton of queer books. More specifically, I'm going to recommend a bunch of different queer books you can use to check off your Queer Lit Readathon Round 13 bingo board. I have recommendations for pretty much every prompt, and if you're watching this in the future after the round is concluded, then it's still just a bunch of queer books that you should read. Now, I cannot recommend something for every square on the bingo board for obvious reasons. I can't fill in your free space, I can't tell you what to read for the continued space because I don't know what you've read and what you haven't read, but I got you covered for pretty much everything else. Starting off with the graphic space. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's for any queer story told in a graphic medium of any form. My first recommendation is The Magic Fish by Trung Nguyen Nguyen. This is an incredibly beautiful graphic novel about a queer Vietnamese boy named Thien who wants to come out to his parents but doesn't know how to because there's no direct translation for gay or queer in Vietnamese, which is the only language his parents speak. But one thing he does love sharing with his parents are these fairy tale stories that he borrows from the library, and they read them together. So he's trying to figure out how he can share his identity with them through those kinds of stories. This book is phenomenal. It's such a tender exploration of how the human experience transcends language in so many ways. If you haven't read it, you absolutely need to read it. My other recommendation for graphic is North Ranger by Ray Terciero and Brie Indigo. This is a queer Latina blend of gothic horror and tender teenage romance in a contemporary setting. It's a modern Achillean reimagining of Northanger Abbey about a teenage boy named Cade whose parents need him to take a summer job to support the family, so they volunteer him to work at a ranch. He's not very good as a ranch hand, but the silver lining is there are these two teenage siblings living at the ranch, one of whom is the ruggedly handsome and enigmatic Henry, who Cade finds himself falling for. This is such an innovative Jane Austen retelling. It's able to capture so much of the original aesthetic and plot while also putting its own fun, modern twist on the story. It's beautifully illustrated, it's heartfelt, and generally I just feel like more people should definitely pick it up. The next prompt is number in the title, which again is pretty self-explanatory. For this, I would recommend a recent read of mine, which was The Story of the 100 Promises by Neil Cochran. This is a whimsical indie trans romantasy. It's a loose Beauty and the Beast retelling as well. It's about a trans sailor named Dara who sadly was disowned by his family after coming out to his father, but he's now a seafaring adventurer who's made a great life for himself. But one day his sister catches up to him to tell him their father is dying and to beg Dara to return home and make amends. However, Dara decides he's going to seek out a sorcerer who can heal his father instead. Not so that he can forgive and forget, but so he can tell his dad exactly how much he sucks and force him to live with that knowledge. So he sets out on a quest to find the powerful sorcerer who once gave him the magic he needed to become the man he is. This is so unique, so endearing, so enchanting. It really is just a whimsical fairy tale with a trans hero learning the importance of being intentional in all the relationships he has, both with other people but also with himself, and it's really, really great. I also recommend 10 Bridges I've Burnt by Brontez Purnell. Especially if you're looking for something shorter, this is great. It's basically a memoir in verse exploring Brontez's experiences as an older, fat, queer, black, transgressive man. It's all about his past, his family, his writing, and really it's an exploration of both love and loneliness. Brontez Purnell is such a gem. His writing is basically the equivalent of throwing up 2 middle fingers to the sky, and I love it so much. There's humor, there's an incredibly piercing voice, but there's also a deep thoughtfulness that very few authors could ever pull off in quite the way that Brontez does. Then we have the anthology space, and first I have to start with It Came from the Closet, edited by Joe Velisi. This is a nonfiction anthology of essays where queer authors all select one quintessential piece of horror media that resonated with them the most, and then they explore how those narratives related back to or helped to shape their queer identity in some way. I love this so much, I recommend it all the time. It references classic pieces of horror like The Exorcist, but also comes into the modern age with things like Jennifer's Body and even Hereditary. Each piece comes from such a different vantage point, but I think everyone in this anthology absolutely understood the assignment. I also think Being Ace, edited by Madeline Dyer, is a good candidate for this space. This is a newer anthology. I think it's an anthology of short stories where a bunch of ace writers and authors came together to explore what asexuality and asexual love can look like across sci-fi, fantasy, and contemporary stories. This sounds really delightful. It has some great contributors like Rosie Thor, Akemi Dawn Bowman, and Emily Victoria, along with so many more, especially because asexuality is still so underrepresented in media and in books. I think this this would be a great choice. The next prompt is Rainy Day Read. Now, this is up for interpretation, obviously, it's highly subjective. You don't have to agree with my take on it, but for me, Rainy Day Reads are like comfort reads. They're short, quick, fun stories that I can finish in 1 or 2 sittings max. The first one that immediately came to mind is Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasulke. I will not stop recommending this book. I do not care how many times you've heard me talk about it. It is just that good. This is a satirical office comedy described as work from home meets WTF. It's about Gerald, who's a mid-level employee at this boring corporate job who somehow finds himself uploaded into Slack. And while he's trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how to get himself out of this program, Slackbot transfers itself into his abandoned body and attempts to hijack his life. This is hysterical, if not also a little bit terrifying. But if you've ever had an office job, if you've ever rolled your eyes at the meaninglessness of corporate lingo, if you've ever bemoaned the absolute BS that is late-stage capitalism, this is the book for you. It's also written entirely in Slack messages, so it goes by super quickly. It's really easy to read and get lost in, but it's also an absurd yet beautiful exploration of the human experience. My other rainy day recommendation isn't a specific book so much as an author, and that author is F.T. Lukens. For the sake of the video, I'll talk about So This Is Ever After, but you can just swap in absolutely any one of their books. So This Is Ever After is a queer satirical fantasy story. It's actually a really fun and unique take on a fantasy adventure because it's all about what happens after the heroes fulfill the magical prophecy and successfully complete their world-saving quest. In this case, these characters were meant to free the kingdom from an evil, tyrannical ruler, but before they can return the rightful heir to power, the main character, Arik, volunteers to be temporarily in charge. But then he finds that he's contending with a new curse because anyone who sits on the throne has to choose a spouse by their 18th birthday or wither away into nothing. And of course, his best friend Matt, who is hopelessly in love with Arik, is going to selflessly help his friend find his one true love. Anything F.T. Lukens writes is equal parts heartwarming and hilarious. They've really found their niche within the queer satirical fantasy space, and I've so enjoyed getting to see all the fun places they're able to go with it. The next prompt is Night, which again is incredibly subjective and can be interpreted in so many different ways. My first recommendation is As You Walk On by Julian Winters. This is about a high schooler named Theo who has his entire future planned out and who desperately wants to have the perfect prom night. So after his friend dares him to go big and propose to his crush at this huge party, Theo is ready to take his chances. But things go epically wrong and Theo flees the scene just looking for a quiet place to have an existential crisis. But after finding what he thinks is an empty bedroom, he's slowly joined by more and more classmates, including an old friend and a possible new flame, who all want to avoid what's beyond that bedroom door for a bunch of different reasons. I chose this book for this prompt because a majority of the story takes place over the course of a single night at this party. It's fun, it's a great coming-of-age story. Julian Winters is another author you can't go wrong with, so I would definitely recommend this. For the night prompt, I would also recommend What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a horror novella. It's a reimagining of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, and it's queer because it's about a former soldier who is trans/genderless and who uses Ka-Khan pronouns. It's about the aforementioned soldier Alex Easton, who receives word that Khan childhood friend Madeline Usher is dying. So Alex races to the Usher Manor to see what Ka can do. What Alex finds is a nightmare of fungal growths and possessed wildlife surrounding a dark, pulsating lake and an incredibly distressed Madeline who speaks in strange tongues and sleepwalks at night. I chose this book for this prompt because, as you can guess, the creepy stuff happens at night. This is another innovative, exciting, classic retelling. Kingfisher is another author who has a really unique voice and vision and is somehow able to blend horror and humor in unexpected ways. I definitely recommend both novellas so far in this series. Next up is International, which of course is still subjective based on where you live. I happen to live in a nation that believes itself to be the center of the universe, and even if you don't live here, you most likely still read books that are set here. So I figured it'd be safe to just recommend any book set outside of the United States. First up is Tim Tomero and the Subterranean Heartsick Blues Blues by H.S. Valley, a dramatically underrated queer fantasy story set in New Zealand and written by a Maori author. This is a super fun and funny magical school type of story. It's an academic rivals to lovers fantasy about Tim and Elliot who hate each other but also both get dumped by their partners the day before a really huge assignment. So they ditch their exes and decide to be each other's project partners instead. And of course, the assignment is to take care of a magically enchanted egg baby to prove that they have child-rearing skills, I guess. Again, this is wildly underrated. It's an incredibly unique and heartwarming take on the found family trope, and it also has accidental domesticity, which is one of my favorite tropes. I happen to think it's a really good time. My other recommendation is Cantoras by Caro de Robertes. This is queer historical fiction set in Uruguay during the 1970s when the country is being ruled by a military government. There are these 5 queer women who find their way to one another and discover an isolated cape on the beach, which they claim as their secret sanctuary that they return to again and again as the years pass. This is a truly incredible book that's so transportative, so thoughtful, such a beautiful meditation on character and the passage of time. There's really nothing like it, and there's really no one who's doing it quite like Caro de Robertes. Next is the Black History prompt, and I think this can also be interpreted in a few different ways. It can mean the history of a place or a nation, but I think it can also be a single person's history of their own life. So my first recommendation is somewhere between the two, and that is The Black Period by Hafaiza Augustus Geter. This is a personal memoir, but it also pulls in elements of history, political analysis, and cultural criticism as the author explores how grief and the expression of grief is a deeply political condition, especially for a queer and disabled Muslim Nigerian woman trying to navigate loss. The author is also a poet and a visual artist, so there's also a lot of different mediums included in the memoir as well. It seems like a really great blend of personal history and social commentary, and even though I haven't had a chance to read it yet, I definitely want to, and I think you should as well. Then I would also suggest Miss Major Speaks by Miss Major Griffin Gracie. This is another recent memoir exploring the future of Black, queer, and trans liberation from the perspective of a legendary trans elder and activist. So this book both documents her life and her experiences, but also provides a roadmap for the challenges that the next generation of queer and trans activists continue to face. This is another one I haven't read yet, but it's definitely on my TBR. I believe my friend Beck has read it, and they're like the aficionado when it comes to radical queer liberation and how that overlaps in the nonfiction space especially. I know they definitely recommend this, and I trust them with my life. Next is the immigrant space. So this is for any kind of queer story about immigrants or the immigration experience. My first recommendation is The City Beautiful by Aidan Polidoros. This is queer historical paranormal fiction. It's set in Chicago during the late 1800s when our main character, Alter, has just traveled from Romania to America by himself with the goal of being able to save up enough money to send back to his family so they can immigrate as well. But when Alter's best friend and secret love, Yakov, becomes the latest victim in a long line of murdered Jewish boys, that dream quickly slips away. In a horrific twist, Alter becomes possessed by Yakov's Dybbuk, and before it can completely take over his body, he will have to track down Yakov's killer before they strike again. Like I said, this is a dark, paranormal YA story, but I also remember enjoying it quite a bit. It's thrilling, it's suspenseful, the supernatural twist forces the story to go to some really interesting and unexpected places, and it's also set against the backdrop of the Chicago World's Fair, so there's just a lot to dig into. I would also recommend Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This is another historical fiction YA story, but set during the 1950s in San Francisco's Chinatown. It's about a teenager named Lily who's discovering her sexuality when she finds this pulp lesbian novel in a shop, and also discovers a lesbian bar called the Telegraph Club. Not only is it a tumultuous time for queer people in general, but the danger is twofold for Lily because Red Scare paranoia is running rampant in San Francisco, and the threat of deportation looms over her parents despite their hard-won citizenship. So if she is discovered frequenting this club, it could irrevocably change everything for her family. This is such a sensational coming-of-age story. It's a brilliant reclamation of queer history history and a celebration of queer counterculture, which has always existed. It's about a young girl struggling to navigate a world that doesn't condone her existence, while also discovering something powerful and true about herself. Then we have Great Outdoors, which again, you can go in so many different directions with. My brain took the very straightforward route because when I thought of the outdoors, I thought of camping. So appropriately, I'm going to start with suggesting Camp by Elsie Rosen. This is a YA romance set at a summer camp for queer teens. It's following Randy, who loves spending his summer at camp with his best friends and taking the stage in the big summer musical, but he's also hopelessly in love with his camp crush, Hudson, who's only into masculine, straight-passing guys. So this summer, Randy is reinventing himself as Del, who's super buff and masculine. He's giving up the nail polish, the show tunes, all of that stuff to try and prove to Hudson that he actually exists. This one's been on my TBR for a while. I've heard pretty good reviews from queer reviewers I trust, and I also appreciate how the story seems to be a mixture of comedy, romance, and commentary on toxic masculinity and how that's both experienced and perpetuated by gay men in gay spaces. Sticking to the summer camp theme, I'd also recommend Drumroll Please by Lisa Jen Bigelow. This is a really sweet and fun queer middle grade story about Melly, who loves playing the drums, and she's super excited to spend the next 2 weeks with her best friend at a music camp in Michigan. But she's also dealing with a lot of change. Her parents have recently split up, her best friend ends up ditching her for other people, and she might also find herself falling for a new girl at camp. This is such a cute middle grade story. It has all the summer camp shenanigans you could ever want. The music element is also really fun, and it's just a really endearing story about a girl trying to figure out where she belongs and who she wants to be. Next is Mental Health, and I'm going to start by recommending The Best at It by Malik Pancholi. This is another queer middle grade book about a gay Indian American boy named Rahul who lives in a small Midwest town. And as he's going into middle school, he's pretty anxious about fitting in and making friends, and that's when his grandfather tells him he should just find what he's really good at and simply become the best at it. Obviously, that's easier said than done, and the story is just about Rahul trying a bunch of different things and wondering if he's truly good at anything. The mental health aspect of the story comes in with both Rahul's anxiety and his OCD, which is something that he's trying to navigate as his anxiety becomes more and more aggravated. I think every aspect of this story is so thoughtfully written. Malik Pancholi is an incredible talent, and he also does a great job with the audiobook. Secondly, and most likely surprising no one, is Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a beloved queer YA story. Darius is not actually out in this first book, but he is questioning his identity. He is an Iranian-American teenager grappling with depression, and when his family takes their first ever trip to Iran, it's a very overwhelming experience. But in Iran, he meets his grandparents' neighbor, Sorab, whose incredible friendship changes his life. This is such a beautiful celebration of friendship and family that also very candidly opens up discussions about navigating mental health pitfalls, especially with the unexpected ways that might overlap with specific cultural identities and experiences. It's a tender, quiet, unassuming story, but it's also told with so much heart. The next prompt is Creepy Queers. I'm not going to say Cemetery Boys because if you're here, you already know about Cemetery Boys, so instead I'm going to start with The Bayou by Arden Powell. This is a queer historical horror novella set in Louisiana during the 1930s. It's about Eugene, who was 12 when a young girl vanished, and everyone chose to believe that she was taken by gators when she strayed too close to the bayou. But he's never been able to shake his belief that her death had to do with the man who used to haunt her, a man who only she and Eugene could see and no one else. Now it's almost 20 years later and people are disappearing again without a trace, and around the same time, a charismatic fugitive named Johnny Walker waltzes into town, leaving chaos in his wake. This is a dark, twisted little novella about taking a hard look at the dark history of our past. It's about being haunted by our mistakes and our regrets and what collective inaction might cost us. Secondly, I gotta go with Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I feel like a lot of people don't know this is queer, but it's actually a buy-for-buy historical horror story. It's set in Mexico City where Montserrat works as a talented sound editor, but because she's a woman, she's always overlooked for work. When her best friend, who's a soap opera star, Tristan, discovers that his new neighbor is an infamous cult horror director, they get roped into helping him complete an unfinished film that he believes has left him cursed. This is wild. It's definitely more of a slow burn horror story. There's a lot of factoids about the movie industry in the late 90s, cult film followings, and Mexican history, but it's also an incredibly gripping take on the dangerously addictive power that comes with approximating ourselves to privilege. Then, of course, we have non-European mythology, which is pretty self-explanatory. I'm gonna start with Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a reimagining of the Ramayana, which is an ancient sacred Indian epic. It's about Kaikeyi, who was raised on tales about the might and benevolence of the gods. Yet all she sees growing up is how women are disrespected and disregarded at every turn. Her mother is banished, and she herself is reduced to a political pawn defined only by the marriage alliance that she might secure. But when she discovers that she might possess a unique magic, she transforms herself into a warrior, a diplomat, and an all-powerful, untouchable queen. Or so she thinks. Now, I have not read this one yet because I am a coward, but I desperately want to, and I also have it on very good authority that Kaikeyi herself is either Arrow or Ace, or potentially both. My second recommendation is Dragon Pearl by Yoon-Ha Lee. This is the first book in a queer middle-grade sci-fi space opera trilogy about Min, who comes from a very long line of fox spirits, but in order to keep her family safe, she is forbidden from ever using her fox magic. She would like nothing more than to escape her desolate home planet just like her older brother June, who joined the Space Forces. But Min's family receives word that June has left his post to go search for the legendary Dragon Pearl, which sounds incredibly out of character, and now Min is determined to find him and clear his name. Yoon-Ha Lee is one of my favorite authors, one of the best sci-fi authors out there, period. This was their first foray into middle grade, and honestly, younger audiences are so lucky to have Yoon-Ha Lee's voice in that space. At long last, we come to magic, which is pretty open-ended, and also a lot of the books I've already recommended could also fit into this space. I'm gonna start by recommending Road to Ruin by Hana Lee. I talked about this one recently in my May wrap-up. It's basically a queer polyamorous sci-fantasy take on a desolate world inspired by Mad Max. The main character, Jinlu, is a mage bike rider, and she's one of the few people daring enough to venture outside the walls of the domed cities that protect humanity from storms and monsters. Besides transporting goods and resources across the wasteland from one city to another, she also carries correspondence, the most important of which are these love letters between a prince and a princess, both of whom Jinlu is desperately in love with. The princess wants to escape her abusive and controlling family, and Jinlu promises to help guide her across the deadly wasteland and into the arms of her prince. But it's not long before they're being ruthlessly pursued by the princess's family, her jilted fiancé, bounty hunters, and even monsters. This is also wild. It has action, it has mystery, it has adventure. There's a breathless, passionate, slow burn, polyamorous romance unfurling as the story progresses. It's also an interesting blend of sci-fi and fantasy because there is indeed actual magic. And lastly, I'm going to suggest another book that's on my own radar, and that is Till Death Do Us Barred by Rose Black. This is a queer, cozy fantasy type story about a former warrior named Logan who finally hung up his axe and decided to settle down with his husband Pi, who happens to be a bard. But before they can fully enjoy their happily ever after, Pi suddenly disappears. Logan discovers that Pi is being blackmailed into stealing a powerful artifact that could create an army of the undead. And with the help of an old adversary, Logan embarks on a quest to not only save his husband, but also to save his marriage. This just sounds super fun. The author describes it as being like a fluffy D&D campaign, which I just think sounds great. I think it also has disability rep as well, and I think it just sounds like a unique take on the cozy fantasy genre that happens to involve necromancy, monsters, and dark magic. So there you have it. Those are a bunch of queer books that you should definitely check out. If you're watching this in real time, I hope these help you with your Queer Lit Readathon round, but if you're not taking part or watching this in the distant future, this should help queerify your TBR all the same. If you have different interpretations of these prompts or different ideas of what you want to read for them, I would love to hear all about it in the comments down below. But again, if you're not doing the Queer Lit Readathon, or if you're watching this after the current round has concluded, just let me know about the last queer book that you read. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.